The CEO pretended to be an uninsured patient. Only one nurse believed his pain was real. The man collapsed onto the emergency room floor just after sunrise, clutching his chest as sweat poured down his face. Patients turned to stare. A receptionist froze. A security guard rushed forward. But within seconds, something far more painful than his physical suffering began to unfold. The staff glanced at his worn-out clothes, his scuffed shoes, and the old backpack hanging from one shoulder. There was no insurance card in his trembling hands. No family member beside him. No sign that he could pay. And suddenly, the room seemed to grow colder. Before we begin this powerful story, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Heart Kindness Story if you believe kindness and second chances can change lives. Your support helps spread stories that remind us of the goodness still left in this world. The man's name was Callum Vance. At least, that was the name written on the identification card he carried that morning. To everyone inside Mercy Heights Medical Center, he appeared to be an ordinary middle-aged laborer struggling to survive. His gray jacket looked years old. His face carried signs of exhaustion. There was nothing about him that suggested power, wealth, or influence. What nobody knew was that Callum Vance was actually Victor Holden, the billionaire CEO who owned the entire hospital network. For years, Victor had received glowing reports from administrators claiming that every patient was treated with dignity regardless of financial status. Awards lined the hospital walls. Advertisements promised compassionate care for all. Survey results looked nearly perfect. Yet anonymous complaints continued arriving at corporate headquarters. Stories surfaced about uninsured patients waiting longer. Stories about poor families being ignored. Stories about people being judged before receiving treatment. Victor wanted the truth. Not the polished reports. Not the carefully prepared presentations. The truth. So he decided to find it himself. That morning, before dawn, he dressed in second-hand clothes, left behind his luxury car, and entered Mercy Heights as an uninsured patient. He never expected what would happen next. The pain in his chest was real. Months earlier, his physician had warned him about stress-related heart complications. While the discomfort was not immediately life-threatening, it was serious enough to require medical attention. Victor hoped someone would notice. Someone would care. Instead, he found himself sitting alone in a crowded waiting room. Minutes turned into an hour. An hour became 2. Patients who arrived after him were repeatedly called first. Some had private insurance cards. Others arrived accompanied by influential family members. Victor watched as nurses passed by without making eye contact. One staff member glanced at his paperwork and quietly placed it beneath a thicker stack of forms. The message was clear. He was not important. Outside the large windows, bright morning sunlight filled the city streets. People hurried to work. Children laughed on their way to school. Life continued normally while Victor sat battling increasing discomfort. His chest tightened. His breathing became uneven. Fear slowly replaced curiosity. What if this happened to someone truly helpless? What if they had nowhere else to go? By midday, Victor began wondering whether his experiment had gone too far. Then something unexpected happened. A young nurse named Amara Quinn noticed him. Amara had worked at Mercy Heights for only 14 months. She was 27 years old and carried herself with quiet determination. Her co-workers often described her as overly sensitive. Some considered her too emotional for the demanding pace of emergency medicine. But Amara possessed something many people had lost. She paid attention. While rushing between patients, she noticed Victor gripping his chest. She noticed his pale complexion. She noticed the fear hidden behind his tired eyes. Most importantly, she noticed that nobody else seemed concerned. Amara reviewed his chart. Her expression changed immediately. Something wasn't right. She approached a supervising nurse and expressed concern. The response was dismissive. The patient had already been assessed. The patient could wait. The patient wasn't considered urgent. Amara looked back toward Victor. His hands were trembling. Every instinct told her something was wrong. For several minutes she wrestled with uncertainty. Following protocol would be easier. Questioning decisions could create conflict. But she remembered something her late mother had once told her. Every person matters when they are hurting. Not some people. Not wealthy people. Every person. Amara returned to Victor and performed her own evaluation. Within moments, alarm bells sounded in her mind. His symptoms suggested a potentially dangerous cardiac condition. She immediately pushed for further testing. Resistance followed. Resources were limited. Beds were scarce. Other patients seemed more profitable. Nobody said those words directly, but everyone understood. Amara refused to back down. She documented her findings. She escalated concerns. She insisted. Finally, Victor was moved for testing. The results shocked everyone. The situation was far more serious than initial assessment suggested. Treatment began immediately. As doctors worked around him, Victor lay quietly observing everything. Not once did Amara ask about money. Not once did she question his insurance status. Not once did she treat him like a burden. She simply treated him like a human being. For the first time that day, Victor felt something stronger than pain. Hope. Over the next several hours, Victor remained under observation. Amara checked on him repeatedly. She adjusted blankets. She monitored his condition. She offered reassurance during frightening moments. Each act seemed small. Together, they became unforgettable. Late that afternoon, Victor overheard a conversation in the hallway. Several staff members complained about uninsured patients. One remarked that people without coverage often wasted hospital resources. Another joked that some patients would never pay their bills anyway. The words hit Victor harder than any physical symptom. Because he knew there were thousands of real patients listening to similar conversations every year. People already frightened by illness. People already carrying enormous burdens. People who desperately needed compassion. As daylight softened into evening, Victor began learning more about Amara. She worked double shifts regularly. She helped support her younger brother through college. She volunteered at free medical clinics on weekends. She often purchased meals for struggling patients using her own money. Yet despite her dedication, promotions constantly passed her by. Administrators viewed her as idealistic. Too compassionate. Too unwilling to prioritize efficiency metrics. Ironically, the very qualities that made her extraordinary prevented her advancement. Victor listened carefully. He never revealed his identity. Not yet. The following morning, hospital executives arrived for a routine leadership meeting. Everything appeared normal. The emergency department buzzed with activity. Doctors reviewed charts. Administrators prepared reports. Nobody suspected what was about to happen. At precisely 10 o'clock, a luxury black vehicle stopped outside the main entrance. Several board members emerged. Hospital leadership hurried to greet them. Confusion spread through the lobby. The CEO was arriving unexpectedly. No one had received advance notice. Employees straightened uniforms. Managers adjusted ties. Whispers echoed through the building. Then Victor Halden walked through the front doors. The same man who had spent the previous day ignored in the waiting room. The same man many staff members assumed was unimportant. The same man only one nurse truly believed. Silence swept across the hospital. Faces turned pale. Eyes widened. Executives exchanged stunned looks. Several employees appeared unable to breathe. Victor slowly walked into the conference room where senior leadership had gathered. The atmosphere felt heavy enough to crush stone. No one knew what he had witnessed. No one knew what he planned to do. For several moments, he said nothing. Then he placed a folder on the table. Inside were notes documenting every observation. Every delay. Every assumption. Every failure. Every act of kindness. Victor spoke calmly. But each word landed with enormous weight. He described sitting in pain for hours. He described being overlooked because he appeared poor. He described hearing conversations that devalued vulnerable patients. Some administrators attempted explanations. Others stared silently at the floor. The evidence was impossible to deny. The hospital's polished reputation hid serious problems beneath the surface. Yet Victor's report contained something else. One bright exception. One reason not to lose faith. Amara Quinn. He described her persistence. Her courage. Her empathy. Her refusal to ignore suffering. He explained how she challenged decisions despite pressure. How she protected a patient everyone else dismissed. How she embodied the values the hospital claimed to represent. Tears appeared in several eyes around the room. Not because they feared consequences. Because they recognized the truth. One person had remembered what healthcare was supposed to be. Word spread throughout the hospital within hours. Employees gathered quietly in hallways discussing what had happened. Many felt embarrassed. Others felt inspired. Some experienced both emotions at once. Meanwhile, Amara remained unaware of the growing attention. She continued caring for patients exactly as she always had. Helping. Listening. Comforting. Serving. When Victor finally met her privately, she appeared nervous. She worried she might have violated procedures. She worried she might have caused trouble. Victor smiled. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he thanked her. Not as a CEO. Not as a billionaire. But as a patient. A patient who had felt invisible until she chose to see him. A patient who had needed someone to believe his pain was real. Amara's eyes filled with tears. She admitted that she simply followed her instincts. Victor responded that instincts like hers were exactly what healthcare needed more of. Over the following months, significant changes transformed Mercy Heights Medical Center. Patient treatment policies were rewritten. Bias training became mandatory. Anonymous reporting systems expanded. Performance evaluations began measuring compassion alongside efficiency. Waiting room procedures were redesigned to prevent financial status from influencing care decisions. Several leadership positions changed hands. Most importantly, a new department focused on patient advocacy was created. Victor asked Amara to lead it. At first, she hesitated. She had never imagined herself in management. But Victor insisted. The hospital needed leaders who understood humanity, not just numbers. Under Amara's guidance, the culture slowly shifted. Stories emerged of patients receiving better care. Families felt heard. Employees rediscovered purpose. The transformation was not instant. Real change rarely is. But it was real. Years later, visitors entering Mercy Heights would see a small plaque displayed near the emergency department. It did not mention Victor's wealth. It did not celebrate corporate success. Instead, it carried a simple message. The greatest medicine begins when someone chooses to care. Thousands passed the plaque every day. Most never knew the story behind it. But those who did understood its meaning. Because healing is not only about machines, procedures, or medications. Sometimes healing begins when a frightened person realizes they are not alone. Sometimes it begins with a single nurse who refuses to look away. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like, share, and comment. Stories like these remind us that kindness still exists in a world that often feels rushed and divided. Special request, comment, kindness sees everyone. If you believe every person deserves dignity, respect, and compassion regardless of their circumstances. Victor Halden never forgot the day he entered his own hospital disguised as an uninsured stranger. He remembered the cold indifference. He remembered the long hours of fear. But most of all, he remembered one nurse who looked beyond appearances. One nurse who saw a suffering human being instead of a financial liability. And in the end, that single act of compassion changed far more than one patient's experience. It changed an entire hospital. It changed countless future lives. Because kindness has a remarkable power. It can travel farther than we imagine. It can heal wounds we cannot see. And sometimes, when the world seems determined to judge people by what they have, kindness reminds us to value people for who they are. That is why the smallest act of compassion may become the most important moment in someone's life. And that is why one nurse's decision to believe a stranger's pain became a story that would never be forgotten.